The sun blazed mercilessly across the barren landscape as Josephine Caldwell watched the stagecoach disappear into a cloud of dust, taking with it her last hope of reaching Abiquiu before nightfall. Abandoned in the New Mexico Territory desert with nothing but her trunk of belongings, she felt the scorching heat of 1876 summer burning through her clothing as sweat trickled down her spine. Josephine wiped her brow with a handkerchief, already damp from previous attempts to cool herself. The argument with the stagecoach driver replayed in her mind his insistence that her documentation wasn't proper, his demand for additional payment she couldn't provide, and his final cruel decision to leave her at this desolate waypoint when she refused his improper advances. "I won't die here," she whispered to herself, straightening her shoulders despite the crushing weight of the midday sun. At 23, Josephine had already weathered more storms than most women twice her age. Orphaned at 16, working as a schoolteacher in Boston until the scandal that wasn't her fault drove her west, she wouldn't let a desert be her final challenge. She assessed her surroundings, seeing little more than scrubby brush and distant mesas. The way station where the coach had stopped was abandoned, a crumbling adobe structure with half its roof caved in. It offered no real shelter from the relentless sun. Josephine dragged her trunk into what little shadow the ruined building cast, knowing it would shift away as the afternoon progressed. Her water canteen was half full. If she rationed carefully, it might last until evening, but what then? The next stagecoach wasn't due for 3 days. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. The shadow moved as predicted, forcing Josephine to huddle against her trunk in a desperate attempt to minimize her exposure. Her pale skin, unsuited to the harsh western climate, had already turned an angry red. Her thoughts became increasingly muddled as the heat sapped her strength. She wasn't sure if the approaching dust cloud was real or a mirage. Blinking through sweat-stung eyes, Josephine watched as it grew larger. A rider was approaching. In her heat-addled state, she couldn't decide whether to feel relief or fear. The rider materialized from the dust, a tall figure on a dun-colored horse. As he drew closer, Josephine saw a man with sun-weathered skin beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His clothes were dusty but well-kept, and though he wore a gun at his hip, there was something in his bearing that didn't strike her as threatening. "Madam?" His voice carried across the distance before he'd fully arrived. "You all right out here?" Josephine struggled to her feet, determined to meet this stranger with dignity despite her dire circumstances. "The stagecoach left me," she managed, her voice raspy from thirst. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse closer. His eyes, a striking blue that seemed impossible in this brown landscape, assessed her condition quickly. "Name's Thomas Slater," he said, already reaching for his canteen. "Folks call me Tucker. You're in a bad way, madam. This sun's no joke." Josephine accepted the water he offered, taking small sips as she disciplined herself to do all afternoon. "Josephine Caldwell. I was traveling to Abiquiu to take a position as the new schoolteacher." Tucker Slater looked at the ruins beside them and then at the merciless sky. Without another word, he began unloading supplies from his horse. "Can't leave you out here," he said simply. "Sun'll kill you before nightfall. Let me rig something up." For the next hour, Josephine watched in grateful amazement as the cowboy constructed a makeshift shelter. He used a tarp from his pack, branches he collected from the sparse vegetation, and rope he seemed to produce endlessly from his saddlebags. His movements were efficient, practiced, as though he'd built shelters in impossible places many times before. "Been riding this territory for 15 years, he explained when he caught her watching. "You learn to make do." When he finished, a surprisingly sturdy lean-to stood attached to the most stable wall of the old way station. It wasn't large, but it cast a blessed shadow over a space big enough for Josephine to sit comfortably. "It's not much," Tucker said, guiding her into the shade, "but it'll keep the worst of the sun off until evening. Then we need to figure what's next." Josephine questioned, relief making her bolder than she might otherwise have been. Tucker crouched down to her level, his face serious. "Madam, I'm not in the habit of leaving folks to die in the desert, especially not a lady on her own." As the afternoon wore on, Tucker tended to his horse, built a small fire pit for later, and occasionally checked on Josephine. He spoke little but with purpose, telling her he ran cattle on a modest spread about 10 miles north, that he'd been to town for supplies, and that he knew the school in Abiquiu had been expecting her weeks ago. "Mail coach has been unreliable lately," he explained. "Indian troubles further north and bandits to the south have the routes all mixed up." Josephine sipped carefully from her replenished canteen. "The driver said my papers weren't in order, but I suspect that was merely an excuse." She stopped, unwilling to speak of the driver's lewd suggestions. Tucker's expression darkened. "Hank Dawson drives the southern route." When she nodded, his jaw tightened. "Man's got a reputation, shouldn't be allowed near decent women." He paused. "Begging your pardon for speaking plain. No need for apologies when you speak the truth, Mr. Slater." As evening approached, the temperature began to drop and Tucker built up the fire. He prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and hardtack, apologizing for its plainness. "I've had worse," Josephine said, gratefully accepting the tin plate. "And none served with such kindness." Under the emerging stars, they talked more freely. Josephine explained how she'd come west after losing her teaching position in Boston due to false accusations from a school board member's son who'd been rebuffed in his advances. "Seems you've had your share of troublesome men," Tucker observed. "Perhaps it's why I appreciate a gentleman all the more when I encounter one," she replied, surprising herself with her forthrightness. Tucker stared into the fire. "My mother raised me right is all. She was alone with 4 boys after my pa died in the war. Taught us to respect women or answer to her. She sounds formidable." "She was," he said, and Josephine noted the past tense with sympathy. As night fully descended, Tucker insisted Josephine take the shelter while he would sleep by the fire. "I've spent more nights under the stars than I can count," he assured her when she protested. "And we'll head to town at first light. It's a fair ride, but we'll make it by afternoon if we push on." Josephine settled into her small shelter, her trunk positioned to give her some privacy, the cowboy's bedroll making her more comfortable than she had any right to expect in such circumstances. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. She was acutely aware of the man sleeping just feet away, a stranger who had shown her nothing but decency when she needed it most. Dawn broke with startling swiftness, the eastern sky blazing with colors Josephine had never seen in Massachusetts. Tucker was already awake, tending a small morning fire with coffee brewing. "Not the finest Boston brew, I expect," he said, handing her a tin cup. "But it'll wake you up." "I've learned to appreciate what's offered with good intentions," she replied, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. After a breakfast of more jerky and the last of yesterday's hardtack, Tucker dismantled the shelter with the same efficiency he'd shown in building it. Josephine watched his hands, strong and capable, yet surprisingly gentle when they needed to be. "Your trunk's a problem," he said finally, eyeing the large piece of luggage. "Can't strap it to my saddle with us both riding." Josephine bit her lip. "I can't leave it. Everything I own is inside." Tucker considered the dilemma. "There's an old travois design I learned from a Ute friend years back. Might work if I can find the right materials." The morning was half gone by the time Tucker had constructed a crude but functional travois that his horse could drag behind them. He secured Josephine's trunk to it, testing the weight. "Poor old Buck's going to earn his feed today," he said, patting the horse's neck. "We'll need to go slower than I'd like and take rest breaks for his sake." When the time came to mount, Josephine faced a new challenge. Her traveling dress, though practical by Eastern standards, was not designed for straddling a horse. After a moment of awkward consideration, Tucker respectfully helped her arrange herself sideways on the saddle in front of him. "Begging your pardon for the familiarity, Miss Caldwell," he said, his arm necessarily around her waist to reach the reins. "There's no proper way to manage this." "Under the circumstances, I believe propriety must yield to practicality," she replied, though she couldn't help the flush that rose to her cheeks at their proximity. The journey to Abiquiu was slow and often uncomfortable, but as the hours passed, Josephine found herself growing accustomed to the rhythm of the horse and the solid presence of the man behind her. Tucker pointed out landmarks, named plants she'd never seen before, and occasionally shared brief stories about his years in the territory. "Been here since '61, he told her. "Came west with my brothers after our mother passed. Started with nothing but what we could carry." "And now you have your ranch," she said. "Just a small spread. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, free and clear." There was pride in his voice, and Josephine found herself wanting to see this place he'd carved from the wilderness through his own determination. By mid-afternoon, the terrain began to change, becoming slightly less arid as they approached the Rio Chama Valley. In the distance, the distinctive landscape surrounding Abiquiu came into view, red and orange cliffs rising dramatically against the blue sky. "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed, momentarily forgetting her discomfort. "This country gets in your blood," Tucker agreed. "Even when it's trying to kill you with heat or cold or thirst, something about it won't let you go." As they rode into Abiquiu, Josephine became acutely aware of her appearance, dusty, sunburned, and arriving on the same horse as a man she'd met just the day before. In Boston, such an entrance would have destroyed her reputation instantly. "The school board chairman is Elias Richardson," Tucker said as they made their way down the town's main street. "His wife Martha is a good woman. They'll help get you settled." Several townspeople stopped to stare as they passed. Tucker nodded greetings to some, but didn't slow down until they reached a well-maintained adobe building with Richardson Mercantile painted above its door. A stocky man with impressive side whiskers emerged as Tucker helped Josephine dismount. "Well now, Tucker Slater. Don't often see you in town 2 days running," he said, then his gaze shifted to Josephine. "And who might this be?" "Elias, this is Miss Josephine Caldwell, your new schoolteacher. Found her stranded at the old Pico's Waypoint yesterday. Stage left her there." Mr. Richardson's eyebrows shot up. "Left you there, in this heat? Good God, woman, you're lucky to be alive." "I'm well aware, sir," Josephine replied, attempting to straighten her appearance, "and entirely grateful to Mr. Slater for his assistance." Martha Richardson appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. She was a plump, pleasant-faced woman with shrewd eyes that took in the situation at once. "Come inside, Miss Caldwell. You look ready to drop." She turned to Tucker. "You too, Tucker. I want to hear the whole story." Inside the Mercantile's back room, over cups of strong tea and slices of fresh bread, Josephine and Tucker recounted the events of the previous day. Martha's expression grew increasingly outraged, while Elias's became more serious. "That's the third complaint about Dawson this month," he said finally. "I'll be writing to the stage company, again." He turned to Josephine. "The schoolhouse has living quarters attached, Miss Caldwell, but they're not ready yet. We weren't expecting you until next week." "You can stay with us," Martha said firmly. "We've plenty of room since our girls married." "That's very kind," Josephine began, but Tucker interrupted. "Her trunk needs to come off my horse, Elias. Buck's done more than his share today." The men went out to deal with Josephine's luggage, leaving her alone with Martha. "He's a good man, Tucker Slater," Martha said, watching Josephine with knowing eyes. "Keeps to himself mostly. Lost his brothers one by one, two to disease, one to Indians back in the Troubles. Been alone on that ranch of his for 5 years now. He was very proper," Josephine felt compelled to clarify. "A complete gentleman throughout," Martha smiled. "Never doubted it for a moment, dear, that's why I mentioned it. Good men are scarce out here. Even scarcer are those who know how to treat a lady." She paused. "And if I'm not mistaken, he looked at you more than once like you were water in the desert." Josephine felt herself blush. We've only just met, Mrs. Richardson. Martha, please. And out here, folks don't have the luxury of long courtships like back east. You get the measure of people quickly when survival depends on it. She patted Josephine's hand. Just something to consider. When the men returned, Elias insisted Tucker stay for supper. Least we can do, he said. Besides, Martha's made enough to feed a cavalry regiment. Tucker glanced at Josephine, something unreadable in his expression. Reckon Buck could use the rest before we head back, he conceded. Dinner was a lively affair, with the Richardsons drawing out both Josephine and Tucker. Josephine spoke of her teaching experience in Boston, her journey west, and her hopes for the Abiquiu school. Tucker, more reserved at first, gradually opened up about his ranch and the challenges of the past season. Drought's been hard on everyone, Elias commented. Your creek's still running, Tucker? For now, but if we don't get rain soon. Tucker left the thought unfinished after the meal when Martha insisted on showing Josephine to her room to rest. Tucker stood to take his leave. I should get back, got animals needing tending. In the dark. Martha challenged. Nonsense, you'll stay in our spare room and leave at first light if you must. Tucker looked as though he might argue, but Elias clapped a hand on his shoulder. Listen to the woman, son, you know she'll win in the end. The following morning, Josephine woke early, still accustomed to rising with the sun from her journey. She found Tucker already in the Richardsons' kitchen, accepting a packet of food from Martha for his ride home. Miss Caldwell, he acknowledged, his hat in his hands. Hoped I'd see you before I left, wanted to make sure you were settled. Thanks to you I am, she said, suddenly aware of how much she owed this quiet man. Mr. Slater Tucker, I don't know how to properly thank you. No need, he said simply. Anyone would have done the same. We both know that's not true. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with things neither knew how to express after such brief acquaintance. The school term starts next Monday, she said finally. Perhaps you could visit sometime, see how your rescue is faring. Something like hope flickered in his eyes. Might be in town next market day, could stop by. Martha, observing from near the stove, smiled to herself. As Tucker mounted his horse to leave, Josephine stood in the mercantile doorway watching him. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture both respectful and somehow personal, before turning Buck toward home. He'll be back, Martha said confidently beside her. Sooner than market day, I'd wager. Josephine didn't answer, but she felt a strange certainty that Martha was right. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Josephine was introduced to the town, shown the schoolhouse, and helped to prepare her living quarters. The small adobe building had 2 rooms, a larger one for teaching and a smaller one behind it where she would live. Simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and basic furniture, it would be her home for the foreseeable future. The townspeople were welcoming if curious about the new Eastern teacher. Many had children who would be her students, and they were eager to make a good impression. Josephine found herself warming to this small community with its mix of Anglo, Hispanic, and Native American residents. On her 4th day in Abiquiu, as she was arranging books on the schoolroom's shelves, a shadow fell across the doorway. Turning, Josephine saw Tucker Slater's tall figure silhouetted against the bright sunlight. Mr. Slater, she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. This is a surprise. He stepped inside, hat in hand. Miss Caldwell, hope I'm not intruding, not at all. I'm just preparing for Monday's classes. She gestured to the books and slates she'd been organizing. Tucker looked around the room with interest. Place looks better than when I went to school here. Course, that was near 20 years ago now. You attended this school for 3 winters. Then my mother needed me working full-time. He ran a hand along one of the desks. Never was much for book learning anyway. I find that hard to believe, Josephine said. You strike me as a very intelligent man. Tucker's weather-worn face showed surprise at the compliment. Kind of you to say. But out here, different kinds of learning keep you alive. He hesitated. Brought you something. From behind his back, he produced a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Nothing fancy, just thought it might be useful. Josephine unwrapped the package to find a beautifully crafted wooden box. Inside were compartments containing various items: a small sewing kit, matches, a compact mirror, a folding knife, and a tiny compass. "It's a survival kit," Tucker explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "After what happened at the way station. Thought you might feel better having emergency supplies. The box fits in a saddlebag or large pocket." Josephine ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "You made this," he nodded. "Winter evenings get long. I carved to pass the time. It's beautiful and thoughtful." She looked up at him. "Thank you, Tucker." His name felt right on her lips, and from his expression he thought so too. "There's a community gathering tomorrow night," she said impulsively. "A welcome for me and the new doctor who arrived last week. Will you come?" Tucker shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Not much for social affairs." "Please," Josephine said softly. "I'd feel better knowing at least one friend was there." His expression softened. "When you put it that way, reckon I could manage it." After Tucker left, Josephine found herself humming as she continued arranging her classroom. The survival kit sat on her desk, a tangible reminder of his thoughtfulness. That evening at dinner with the Richardsons, who had insisted she continue taking meals with them until school started, Martha noted her brightened mood. "Tucker Slater stopped by the school today," Elias commented casually. "Saw his horse outside when I rode past." "Did he now?" Martha's eyes twinkled. "And what did our solitary rancher want?" Josephine told them about the survival kit, showing it to them after dinner. "Fine craftsmanship," Elias said appreciatively. "Tucker's always been good with his hands." "And he's coming to the gathering tomorrow," Josephine added. Martha and Elias exchanged meaningful glances. "Well now," Martha said, "that's something. Tucker hasn't attended a town social since his brother James died." The community gathering was held in the town's small church, the only building large enough to accommodate most of Abiquiu's residents. Long tables of food lined one wall, while benches and chairs had been arranged to create space for both sitting and dancing. Josephine wore her best dress, a blue cotton with white trim that she'd carefully preserved for special occasions. Martha had helped her style her hair, pinning the chestnut waves into a becoming arrangement. "You look lovely, dear," Martha assured her as they entered the church together, certain to catch the eye of every unmarried man in town. "And maybe a few married ones too, though they'd best not let me see it." The gathering was already underway, with children running between groups of talking adults while a trio of musicians tuned their instruments in one corner. Josephine was introduced to Dr. Wilson, a serious young man recently graduated from a Philadelphia medical school, and several other townspeople she hadn't yet met. She was speaking with the town's blacksmith and his wife when she felt a change in the room's energy. Turning slightly, she saw Tucker standing just inside the doorway, looking distinctly uncomfortable in clean clothes that still showed signs of hard wear. His hair was damp from recent washing, and he'd clearly made an effort to be presentable. Excusing herself, Josephine crossed the room to greet him. "You came," she said simply, "said I would." His eyes took in her appearance, a flash of admiration quickly concealed. "You look very fine this evening, Miss Caldwell. Josephine, please. After all we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Josephine, then." The evening progressed pleasantly, with Tucker gradually relaxing as it became clear no one expected him to be the center of attention. He spoke when spoken to, ate the abundant food with appreciation, and watched the dancing with interest, though he made no move to participate. "Don't you dance, Tucker?" Josephine asked after watching several couples twirl to a lively tune. "Been too long," he admitted. "Probably step all over a lady's feet now." "I'm willing to risk it," she said boldly. Something flickered in his eyes: hesitation, then determination. "Might make folks talk. They're already talking. I arrived in town on your horse, remember?" This drew a genuine laugh from him, a sound Josephine realized she hadn't heard before. "Fair point," he conceded, offering his hand. "Can't make it much worse, I suppose." His dancing was like everything else he did, careful, competent, and more skilled than he claimed. He held her respectfully, maintaining a proper distance while still managing to guide her confidently through the pattern. "You dance very well for someone out of practice," Josephine observed. "My mother insisted all her boys learn, said we'd thank her someday." A shadow crossed his face. Guess she was right. When the music slowed to a waltz, Tucker's hand tightened slightly on hers. "Perhaps we should sit this one out," he suggested, being a bit more proper. Josephine understood his concern. A waltz required closer contact, and they were already drawing curious glances. "Of course," she agreed, though part of her was disappointed. As he escorted her back to her seat, Dr. Wilson approached, requesting the dance Tucker had declined. Josephine accepted out of politeness, aware of Tucker watching as the young doctor led her back to the floor. "You've made quite an impression on our reclusive Mr. Slater," the doctor commented as they began to waltz. "Haven't seen him at a gathering in years, let alone dancing." "We met under unusual circumstances," Josephine replied neutrally. "So I've heard. Quite the dramatic rescue, Doctor." Wilson's tone was light, but his eyes were assessing. "A woman alone in this territory needs to be careful about her associations, Miss Caldwell. Reputations are fragile things." Josephine stiffened. "Mr. Slater saved my life, Doctor. I would think gratitude a natural response." Of course, I meant no offense. It's just, well, there are certain social expectations even here. And while Slater is respected as a hard-working rancher, he's hardly the sort of man someone of your background would normally." He trailed off, perhaps sensing her growing displeasure. When the dance ended, Josephine thanked him coolly and made her way back to where Tucker stood talking with Elias. The men fell silent as she approached, an awkwardness settling between them. "Everything all right?" Tucker asked, his gaze moving from her to the doctor, now conversing with another partner. "Perfectly," she assured him, though her tone belied her words. The rest of the evening passed pleasantly enough, but Josephine was acutely aware of the social currents flowing around her. As the new schoolteacher, she held a position of respect in the community, expected to exemplify proper behavior. Yet her evident preference for Tucker's company had not gone unnoticed. When the gathering began to disperse, Tucker offered to walk her back to the Richardsons. They moved slowly through the cool evening air, the stars brilliantly clear above them. "Sorry if I caused you any trouble tonight," Tucker said after they'd walked in silence for a while. "You haven't," Josephine insisted. "Dr. Wilson, on the other hand, said something about me." Tucker's voice was carefully neutral, implied that our friendship might damage my reputation. She shook her head in frustration. "As if I hadn't had enough of such narrow-mindedness in Boston." Tucker stopped walking. "He's not entirely wrong, Josephine. A refined lady like yourself, spending time with a rough rancher folks will talk. Let them," she said firmly. "I've learned the hard way not to let others dictate my choices." They reached the Richardsons' house, pausing at the front gate. In the silvery moonlight, Tucker's face was half in shadow, his expression unreadable. "I'm riding back to the ranch tomorrow," he said. "Got work piling up, but I could come to town next Sunday if you'd want to visit her your first week of teaching." "I'd like that very much," Josephine replied, her heart beating faster at the thought. Tucker hesitated, then reached for her hand. His calloused fingers enclosed hers gently, the touch sending an unexpected warmth through her. "Good night, Josephine," he said softly. "Good night, Tucker." She watched him walk away, a tall silhouette against the moonlit street, before turning to enter the house where Martha waited with knowing eyes and discretion enough not to comment directly on the lingering farewell she'd witnessed. The first week of school passed in a flurry of activity. With 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, Josephine had her hands full establishing routines, assessing abilities, and getting to know each child's strengths and challenges. The work was exhausting but deeply satisfying. By Sunday, she had moved fully into her quarters behind the schoolroom, grateful for the privacy after the Richardsons' generous hospitality. The small space was sparsely furnished but clean, and Josephine had added touches from her trunk to make it feel more like home, a colorful quilt on the narrow bed, a small framed portrait of her parents on the table, and books arranged on a crude shelf Tucker had hastily constructed for her before leaving town. She was sweeping her tiny porch when she saw him approaching on horseback, right on schedule. Something in her chest tightened at the sight of him, a reaction she wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging after such short acquaintance. Tucker dismounted, leading Buck to the hitching post before approaching with a canvas bag in hand. "Brought some things from the ranch," he explained. "Fresh eggs, some late tomatoes from my garden, and beef I smoked last week." "That's very thoughtful," Josephine said, genuinely touched by his consideration. "Would you like some coffee? I was just about to make a pot." Inside her small living quarters, Tucker stood awkwardly until she invited him to sit at her tiny table. The space felt even smaller with his presence filling it, his broad shoulders and long legs seemingly too large for the modest furniture. "How was your first week of teaching?" he asked as she prepared the coffee. Josephine told him about her students, the challenges of teaching such a wide range of ages and abilities, and her plans for the coming months. Tucker listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. "The oldest boy, Carlos Martinez, reminds me a bit of myself at that age," Tucker commented. "Smart but restless. School probably feels like a cage." "He's very bright," Josephine agreed, "but struggles to see how reading Shakespeare will help him on his family's farm." "Could show him practical applications," Tucker suggested. "Ledger keeping, contract reading, things a farmer needs." "That's an excellent idea." Josephine poured the coffee and joined him at the table. "What about you? How was your week?" Tucker described his work on the ranch, mending fences, preparing for winter, and worrying about the continued drought. As he spoke, Josephine found herself imagining the life he described, so different from anything she'd known in Boston. "Would you show me sometime?" she asked impulsively. "Your ranch, I mean." Tucker looked startled by the request. "It's nothing fancy, just a small spread with a simple house." "I'd still like to see it, to understand your life better." He studied her for a moment, something unreadable in his eyes. "People would talk." "They already are," Josephine pointed out. "Martha told me the sewing circle spent most of Wednesday discussing whether you'd courted anyone since coming to Abiquiu." Tucker nearly choked on his coffee. "They what?" "Apparently, your attendance at the gathering was quite the topic of conversation. Mrs. Wilson, the doctor's mother, was particularly interested in your sudden social emergence." "Good Lord," Tucker muttered. "Can't even attend one social without becoming gossip fodder." "Welcome to my world," Josephine said with a small smile. "In Boston, my every movement was scrutinized for propriety. One of the reasons I came west was to escape such constant judgment, only to find it follows you." Tucker's expression was sympathetic, perhaps not as severely. "Mrs. Richardson defended you quite vigorously, I'm told. Said you were a fine man with unfortunate circumstances, and that the town would do well to encourage rather than speculate." Tucker looked genuinely surprised. "Martha said that? She holds you in high regard, as do I." Their eyes met across the small table, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a shared recognition of mutual respect that might be growing into something more. The moment was broken by a knock at the door. Josephine rose to answer it, finding Dr. Wilson on her porch with a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Miss Caldwell," he said, his smile faltering slightly when he caught sight of Tucker at the table behind her. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Mr. Slater was kind enough to bring me some provisions from his ranch," Josephine explained, accepting the flowers with a polite thank you. "Would you care to join us for coffee, Doctor?" Dr. Wilson glanced between them, clearly hesitating. "Perhaps another time. I merely wanted to welcome you properly to our community now that you've completed your first week of teaching." "That's very kind," Josephine said neutrally. After the doctor left, Tucker stood, reaching for his hat. "Should probably head back, got chores waiting." You don't have to leave on his account, Josephine said, disappointed. Better that I do, Tucker replied, his expression carefully composed. Doctors write for someone like you, Josephine, educated, respectable family, future full of possibilities. Someone like me. She repeated, an edge entering her voice. And what exactly am I like, Mr. Slater, that you feel qualified to determine what's right for me? Tucker looked taken aback by her sudden sharpness. I only meant, I know precisely what you meant, Josephine interrupted. You believe as doctor. Wilson so unsubtly suggested at the gathering that I should restrict my associations to those of similar background and education. That a Boston-bred schoolteacher has no business forming attachments to a rough rancher, I believe those were his words. Josephine, I fled Boston because I refused to let others dictate my life based on narrow social expectations. I will not have you doing the same, no matter how well-intentioned. Tucker was silent for a long moment, studying her flushed face. Then, unexpectedly, a slow smile spread across his features. Yes, madam, he said finally. Won't happen again. The tension between them dissolved as quickly as it had formed. Josephine felt a blush rising to her cheeks at her outburst. I apologize for speaking so forcefully. Don't, Tucker said simply. You meant every word and you were right to say them. He moved toward the door but paused with his hand on the latch. About seeing the ranch, I'd be honored to show you. Next Saturday, if you're free, could ride out in the morning, be back before dark. I'd like that very much, Josephine replied, her heart lightening. After Tucker left, Josephine found herself standing in her small room, the doctor's flowers forgotten on the table as she replayed the conversation in her mind. She was unaccustomed to speaking so directly, to defending her right to choose her own associations so vehemently. Yet something about Tucker Slater made her feel she could be entirely herself, honest, unguarded, and free from the constraints that had bound her in Boston. The following Saturday dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day for riding. Tucker arrived at the schoolhouse shortly after sunrise, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a side saddle. Borrowed her from the Richardsons, he explained. Thought you'd be more comfortable than riding double all that way. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Josephine deeply. She had dressed practically for the excursion in her sturdiest skirt and boots, with a shawl for the morning chill. You look ready for ranch life, Tucker commented approvingly as he helped her mount. The ride to Tucker's ranch took several hours, following trails that wound through increasingly rugged country. As they rode, Tucker pointed out landmarks, named distant mountains, and shared stories of the land they traversed. Josephine found herself enchanted by both the dramatic landscape and the man who so clearly loved it. There it is, Tucker said finally, as they crested a rise overlooking a small valley. Nothing fancy, like I said. Before them lay a modest but well-maintained ranch. A sturdy log house with a stone chimney stood near a creek that cut through the property. Several outbuildings, a barn, corrals, and what appeared to be a smokehouse were arranged nearby. In the pastures beyond, cattle grazed on grass that looked dry but still serviceable. It's wonderful, Josephine said sincerely. Tucker gave her a sideways glance, as if checking for polite falsehood, but seemed satisfied by what he saw in her expression. As they rode closer, Josephine noticed details that spoke of care and hard work: the neatly stacked firewood, the carefully maintained fences, the small garden plot still showing signs of recent harvest. This was a place built by patience and determination, qualities she was coming to associate strongly with its owner. Built most of it myself, Tucker said as he helped her dismount in the yard. Started with just a one-room cabin, added on as I could afford it. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace dominating one wall. A rough-hewn table with benches stood in the center, while a rocking chair and bookshelf occupied a corner near the hearth. 2 doors led off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. It's very comfortable, Josephine said, noting the unexpected touches that softened the rustic space, hand-woven blankets on the bench seats, a colorful rug before the hearth, and, surprisingly, several shelves of well-worn books. Tucker followed her gaze to the bookshelf. "My mother's," he explained. "She taught us all to read before we ever saw a schoolhouse, said books were windows to places we might never see otherwise. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Tucker moved to the shelf, running his fingers along the spines. "Used to read to us every night, no matter how tired she was from working all day." He pulled out a volume, handing it to Josephine. This was her favorite, Shakespeare's sonnets. Josephine opened the book carefully, noting the name inscribed inside. "Elizabeth Slater, 1840. Your mother had excellent taste," she said, touched by his willingness to share something so personal. Tucker showed her around the rest of the house and then the ranch buildings, explaining his operation with quiet pride. Josephine listened intently, asking questions that revealed her genuine interest. "Most women would be bored to tears by now," Tucker observed as they walked back from the corral where he'd introduced her to his small herd of horses. "I find it fascinating," Josephine replied honestly. "You've built something remarkable here, Tucker. All by yourself with your own hands and determination." He looked at her for a long moment, an expression in his eyes she couldn't quite decipher. Not many would see it that way. Perhaps they're not looking properly. They ate lunch at Tucker's rough-hewn table, a simple meal of cold meat, bread, and apples that tasted better than any fine Boston restaurant fare to Josephine. As they talked, she found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet man whose strength and gentleness seemed so perfectly balanced. When it came time to leave, Josephine felt a surprising reluctance. Something about this place and the man who had created it resonated deeply with her. "Thank you for showing me your home," she said as Tucker helped her mount the mare. "I understand you better now, I think. That right?" Tucker's voice held a note of teasing. "And what do you understand, school teacher?" "That you're a man who builds things to last," she said simply. "Who cares for what's his with dedication and patience?" Tucker's smile faded, replaced by something more intense. For a moment, Josephine thought he might say more, but he merely nodded and moved to mount his own horse. The ride back to Abiquiu was quieter, both of them lost in thought as the afternoon shadows lengthened. When they reached the town, the sun was just beginning to set, painting the adobe buildings in gold and orange. Tucker accompanied Josephine to her door, declining her invitation to stay for supper. "Got to get the Richardsons' mare back and then ride home," he explained. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Josephine asked. "Got church in the morning," Tucker said. "Could stop by after if that's all right." "I'd like that." As they stood on her small porch, the moment seemed to stretch with unspoken possibilities. Tucker's eyes met hers, and Josephine felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with the day's long ride. "Josephine," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I'm not good at saying things pretty, but today was special. Having you at the ranch, seeing you there, it felt right somehow." "It felt right to me too," she admitted softly. Tucker's hand moved as if to reach for hers, then stopped. "There's a big gap between us, your education, your background, my rough ways." "Not so large as you imagine," Josephine countered. "We're both people who have faced hardship, who value honesty and hard work, who build things to last." She deliberately echoed her earlier observation. This time, Tucker did take her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "You make me think impossible things might be possible after all." "Sometimes they are," she whispered. For a breathless moment, Josephine thought he might kiss her. Instead, Tucker raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was both respectful and somehow deeply intimate. "Until tomorrow," he said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, watching him walk away with a curious mixture of disappointment and anticipation swirling within her. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Josephine found sleep elusive. Her mind kept returning to the small valley ranch, to the life Tucker had built there, and to the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, there might be a place for her in it someday. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Tucker would ride into town every Sunday after church, sometimes staying for supper, sometimes just for coffee and conversation. Occasionally during the week, he would appear unexpectedly with small gifts, fresh game for her pot, a jar of honey from a neighbor's hives, once a small carved wooden bird that he'd made during evening hours. With each visit, each conversation, each shared moment, Josephine felt the connection between them deepening. Tucker gradually revealed more of himself, his hopes for expanding the ranch, his memories of his family, his private enjoyment of poetry that he'd never admitted to anyone else in Abiquiu. In turn, Josephine shared her own dreams, her frustrations with Boston society, and her growing love for this harsh but beautiful territory. Dr. Wilson continued his attentions as well, calling regularly with invitations to dinner or community events. Josephine was polite but increasingly firm in maintaining boundaries, making it clear that while she valued his friendship, her heart was engaged elsewhere. "Tucker Slater is a good man," Martha Richardson said one afternoon when Josephine stopped by the mercantile. "But he's been hurt deeply. Lost everyone he loved one by one, makes a person cautious about caring too much again." "I understand caution," Josephine replied, "but at some point one must risk pain for the chance at happiness." Martha patted her hand. "You're good for him, dear. Anyone with eyes can see how he lights up around you." As autumn deepened into winter, the schoolhouse became increasingly cold. One Monday morning in early December, Josephine arrived to find the building freezing, the small stove inadequate against the bitter weather that had blown in overnight. She was attempting to build up the fire when the door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Tucker Slater, his coat dusted with snow. "Tucker, what are you doing here?" Josephine exclaimed, surprised to see him on a weekday. Richardson mentioned the school stove was acting up. He stamped snow from his boots. "Thought I'd take a look before your students arrive." Within minutes, Tucker had diagnosed the problem, a partially blocked chimney, and cleared it, allowing the stove to draw properly. The room began to warm as the first students arrived, stomping snow and rubbing cold hands. "You're an angel of mercy, Mr. Slater," Josephine said gratefully as the temperature rose to tolerable levels. Tucker shrugged off the praise. "Simple fix. But you need more firewood split to smaller pieces for this stove." He glanced at the dwindling woodpile by the door. "I'll bring some by this afternoon." True to his word, Tucker returned after school with his wagon loaded with neatly split firewood, which he stacked carefully beside the schoolhouse. "That should last you a few weeks," he said, brushing wood chips from his coat. "I'll bring more before it runs low." "You're very kind, Tucker," Josephine said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "At least let me offer you supper for your trouble." Inside her small quarters, Josephine prepared a simple meal while Tucker built up the fire in her own small stove. The space felt especially cozy with the winter storm raging outside, the two of them working in comfortable harmony. As they sat down to eat, Tucker seemed more serious than usual. "Been thinking," he said finally, "about the future." "Oh." Josephine tried to keep her voice casual despite the sudden racing of her heart. "Ranch is doing all right, even with the drought. Thinking of building on another room to the house come spring." He paused, eyes on his plate. "If I had reason to." Josephine set down her fork, understanding the unspoken question. "What sort of reason might you need, Tucker?" His eyes met hers, vulnerability and hope mingling in his gaze. "The kind that makes a house into a home, that fills empty spaces with something worth having." "That sounds like a very good reason," she said softly. Tucker reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Josephine, I'm not a man of fancy words, never will be, but I know what I feel, and it's stronger and truer than anything I've ever felt before." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I'm falling in love with you. Probably been falling since I found you in the desert. And if you could see your way clear to considering a future with a simple rancher like me—" "Yes," Josephine interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Yes, Tucker, I can see that future very clearly. I've been seeing it for some time now. The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mesas. You sure? Life on a ranch is hard, especially for a woman used to city comforts. I'm sure, Josephine said firmly. I've never been more certain of anything. Tucker rose from his chair, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. For a moment, they simply stood together, the rightness of their embrace confirming what words had just declared. May I kiss you, Josephine? Tucker asked, his voice husky with emotion. Please, she whispered. His lips met hers gently at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. It was a kiss of promise and tenderness, of dreams shared and hardships faced together. When they finally parted, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. I should go before this storm gets worse, he said reluctantly, and before I forget myself completely. Will you come tomorrow? Josephine asked, not wanting to let him go. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, he promised. The following day, Tucker returned as promised, this time with a small box in his hand. Inside was a simple silver ring with a single small pearl. It was my mother's, he explained as he slipped it onto Josephine's finger. She made me promise to give it only to a woman as strong and true as she was. Now I know why I've kept it all these years. It was waiting for you. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Most reactions were positive, particularly from the Richardsons who had quietly hoped for this outcome. Never seen Tucker so happy, Elias commented. Man walks around town like he's floating 6 inches off the ground, doctor. Wilson was gracious if disappointed, offering sincere congratulations and assuring Josephine he valued her friendship regardless. They planned a spring wedding after the school term ended. Josephine would finish teaching her students through May, then move to the ranch as Tucker's wife. In the meantime, weekends found her at the ranch, helping plan the addition to the house and learning the skills she would need as a rancher's wife. You're a natural, Tucker observed one Sunday in February as Josephine successfully managed the temperamental cookstove in his kitchen. Most city women would be complaining about the lack of modern conveniences. I find I prefer the simplicity, Josephine replied honestly. Everything here has purpose and meaning, nothing wasteful or pretentious. As winter yielded to spring, the drought that had plagued the territory finally broke. March brought soaking rains that transformed the landscape, bringing forth wildflowers and fresh grass for the cattle. Tucker saw it as a good omen for their marriage. Land's celebrating right along with us, he said, watching a thunderstorm from the ranch house porch, his arm around Josephine's waist. Their wedding day in late May was perfect warm sunshine, clear skies, and the valley around Tucker's ranch lush with new growth. The ceremony was held outdoors, with most of Abiquiu in attendance. Josephine wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. As they spoke their vows before the traveling minister, Josephine looked into Tucker's clear blue eyes and saw the future stretching before them, years of work and love, challenges and joys, all shared together. I, Thomas Tucker Slater, take you, Josephine Elizabeth Caldwell, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he said, his voice strong and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When Josephine repeated the vows, her voice didn't waver. This was right as anything had ever been in her life. The refined Boston school teacher and the rough Western rancher, finding in each other exactly what they needed most. After the ceremony and celebration, when the guests had departed for town and they were finally alone, Tucker carried Josephine across the threshold of their home now, truly and completely. Welcome home, Mrs. Slater, he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room, now brightened with touches Josephine had added over the past months. Home, she repeated, savoring the word. I never truly had one, not since my parents died, just places I lived. You have one now, Tucker promised, drawing her into his arms. "For as long as you want it." "Forever, then," Josephine whispered against his lips. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other fully for the first time. Tucker's strength was tempered by tenderness, his passion guided by patience as he introduced Josephine to the physical expression of their love. For Josephine, any lingering nervousness dissolved in the safety of his embrace, in the certainty that this man, her husband, would never hurt her or rush her beyond her readiness. In the quiet aftermath, lying in the moonlight that filtered through the bedroom window, Josephine traced the contours of Tucker's face with gentle fingers. "I never imagined my life would lead me here," she confessed. "To this place, to you, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Tucker caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "When I found you in the desert that day building that shade to keep the sun off you, I was just doing what needed doing. Never thought it would change everything. You didn't just build me shelter, Tucker. You stayed, you saw me through." Josephine's voice caught with emotion. "No one had done that for me before, and I always will," he promised, gathering her close. "Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, I'll stay beside you, Josephine, always." The years that followed proved the truth of that promise. Life on the ranch was indeed challenging. Drought returned, cattle prices fluctuated, and the harsh environment demanded constant vigilance and hard work. But there were joys too, profound ones that made every hardship worthwhile. Their first child, a son they named James after Tucker's brother was born a year after their wedding. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, and another son, William, 2 years after that. The house expanded again to accommodate their growing family, with Tucker building each new room with the same care he'd shown in constructing the original structure. Josephine never returned to formal teaching, but she educated their children at home until they were old enough to attend the Abiquiu school. She also became known in the area for helping neighbors' children who struggled with reading or numbers. Her patience and skill creating a small but steady stream of young visitors to the ranch. Through good years and lean ones, through joys and sorrows, including the loss of their fourth child shortly after birth, Tucker and Josephine's bond only strengthened. They faced each challenge together, supporting each other with the same steadfastness that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. On their 20th anniversary, Tucker took Josephine back to the site of their first meeting, the abandoned way station where he'd built her that first crucial shade. The place was even more dilapidated now, hardly recognizable, but the memories it held were vivid for both of them. "Hard to believe it's been 20 years, Tucker said, helping Josephine down from her horse. She rode astride now, having abandoned side saddles years ago as impractical for ranch life. "In some ways it feels like yesterday," Josephine replied, surveying the crumbling adobe walls. "In others, like another lifetime entirely." Tucker's hair was streaked with gray now, his face more deeply lined from years in the sun and wind. Josephine's chestnut hair showed silver threads as well, and the hands she placed on her husband's chest were work roughened in a way her Boston self would never have imagined. "Any regrets?" Tucker asked, his arms encircling her waist. It was a question he still asked occasionally, as if some part of him still couldn't quite believe she'd chosen this life, this man. "Not a single one," Josephine answered truthfully. "Every choice, every hardship, every joy has been exactly as it should be. Because they all led me here, to you and our children and the life we've built together." Tucker's smile was as warm and genuine as it had been 20 years before. "Remember what I promised that first night as husband and wife? That you'd stay beside me," Josephine said softly. "Always." "Still true," Tucker said, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he'd always shown. "Still beside you, still the luckiest man in the New Mexico territory." "And I'm still the most fortunate woman," Josephine replied. "To have been left in the heat with no shelter that day, and to have had a cowboy build me shade and stay by my side." As they rode home together toward the ranch where their children and grandchildren waited to celebrate their anniversary, Josephine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from proper Boston society to this wild, beautiful land and the arms of this good, strong man. It hadn't been the life she'd once imagined for herself, but it had become more than she'd ever dared to dream possible, a life built on love, respect, and the unwavering commitment of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed most. And all because, on a scorching day in 1876, she had been left in the heat with no shelter, and a cowboy had built her shade and stayed beside her.